Right. I think, is it you, Karuna? Yeah. We're going to have the quarterly reports on the group, which is item 8. I welcome you to the front there, of you and your team.
Thanks, Mayor Brown. So this is the regular quarterly performance report, so going back in time a little bit from the previous item, and we'll be covering the key financials and service performance information through to the end of September. We've got a short presentation with Ross leading off on the key group results. John will give an update on the debt, and Nicola will focus on the AC parent results. I'll briefly speak to some of the updated performance measure results, and we'll have some time for questions and feedback at the end. So Ross, over to you.
Okay, thank you. If we can go to the next slide, please. Is it working? It doesn't seem to be working. There we go. Okay, so I'll step through the group results for the quarter in a second. But before I do, just a quick note on the format of the results. So the team's been working hard as part of continuous improvement to look at the look and feel of the reports, how the information is presented, how it's reported, how it comes through, with a view to try to make it simpler and easier for people to understand without taking away any of the detail. So one of the key innovations is having an upfront at-a-glance summary. So the first 2 to 3 pages, I think there's 2 pages in this pack. It kind of looks like what you've got on the screen. It's just kind of, here's what you need to know. So if you just spend a little bit of time looking at those 2 pages, it kind of gives you in a nutshell what has happened, how did we go for the quarter across the council group, and then you can kind of step through all of the components of the pack from there. We've also tried to simplify the layout in the text, have less text, more white space, make it more visual so that the graphs pop out and the key information is presented primarily through charts, and then the key bits of what you need to know. So we've tried to improve it and make it work better for you, not to try to take away any detail. It's still a big long pack, but it's trying to make it more accessible for yourselves and for the public. Another element we've tried to do is improve it and better align it with the CCO quarterly reporting, which goes to the different committees, the CCO Oversight and the Transport Infrastructure Committee. And so there's been some really good engagement there with the chair and deputy chair of those 2 committees, and some really helpful feedback into the format of the report here to get that better alignment. One thing that we've been working away on, but haven't quite got there for this quarter's report, is how we report on capital projects. So at one of your recent meetings, you kind of asked us to have a look at, can we report the capital project performance better? So rather than just talk about dollars spent, how do we go with actual delivery? What we've got easily at hand is all of the financial stuff. That bit's easy. There is a wealth of information around project milestones, etc., but it is kind of dispersed. It's not all integrated. So we are working away on that, and we're hoping to come back in the new year and give you a much, the next quarterly report should have much better reporting around how we're going with delivery of the projects. Is the actual delivery on track? Are the things working to budget as opposed to just how much money did we spend? So yeah, we're underway. Watch this space. If I move to the next slide, so some of the projects, I guess at just a high level, what are some of the highlights in terms of project delivery for this particular quarter? One is the Northwest bus improvements. So that has been well progressed. A couple of key deliverables there is a couple of bus stops around Lincoln Road, both north and south bus stops are under construction and well progressed. Been some really good work in the Rodney area, funded by the Rodney Transport Targeted Rate. So footpaths have been delivered in Huapai, Riverhead and Dairy Flat. Good progress with the Snells Beats wastewater treatment plant. So that replaces 2 ageing old wastewater treatment plants for that surrounding area. It also sets up the whole area for the growth for the next 35 years. In terms of, the dollars, 92% of budget delivered for the quarter, 155 million increase compared to the last quarter. So, some of it will be higher cost and inflation, and some of it will be more stuff delivered. And as I said, next quarter, we'll give you more of a breakdown. Why is it kind of behind? Why have we spent less than budget? A lot of that is around the flood remediation projects. Some of those things are taking time to work through. It's taking a lot longer to work through the design, making sure we get designs and the planning correct before people launch into construction. So the budgeted sort of assume we'll be into full-on delivery mode on a lot of these things, but some of them are taking longer to get the design right. But we are expecting things to pick up and accelerate, and so the view is that we will be, across the group, being close to full delivery of the capital program by the end of the financial year. Go to the next slide, operating performance. So direct revenue, 25 million favourable to budget across the group. And as was sort of mentioned in the previous item, consenting volumes are holding up better than expected, and so that is giving rise to higher regulatory revenue than we had projected. Also, bus patronage is up compared to the budget projections, so that helps revenue. That more people wanting to travel on buses creates significant issues in terms of the long-term plan and funding that going forward. But for the current financial year, it means that public transport revenue is higher than we had planned. We've got some additional operating grants from Wakotau for some storm repairs, so some transport storm work that's underway, some more subsidies coming through than we'd anticipated in the budget. On the spend side of things were generally pretty much in line with budget, very, very close to budget and across the group. Some higher grant expenses, some pluses and minuses in the other areas. There were some rising contract costs, outsourced services, and a lot of that relates to the storm recovery work, and also some additional outsourced contracting in the consenting area, because we had more volumes to deal with to support that revenue. We had to get some more contractors to help with the volumes there. On the other hand, we had a bit less consultancy spend and professional services spend than anticipated because of some projects being a bit delayed. So those kind of things all kind of net out, and we're pretty much on budget in terms of direct expenditure across the group. Going to the next slide, FTEs. So what's happened with FTEs across the group? So compared to the start of the financial year, so over the 3 months, FTEs across the group has come down by about 230 FTEs. The biggest movements were Auckland Transport and Tātaki. So Auckland Transport and Tātaki, for both of them, it was a large part of that was organisational restructures as a result of decisions made through the annual budget. Auckland Transport, also a bit of attrition there. In Tātaki, that was a bit of the restructures, a bit of the FIFA World Cup rolling off, and so our FTEs associated with delivering that program have rolled out of the numbers, and because of budget decisions made around reducing some of the spend and activity for Tātaki in areas like events, entertainment, Auckland Live, and some of the back office services as well. That's all kind of flowed through and is also tied up with the restructure. Across Auckland Council and the parents, there's been smaller restructures, so some reductions overall, but generally small scale. So that's a picture of the group results and FTE. So I'll pass across to John Bishop to talk about the group debt picture.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. So the debt position at the end of September was net debt of 11.7 billion. That's a decrease of 0.7 billion since the beginning of the year, and that's a result of the sale of the airport shares, which was used to pay down debt. That results in a debt to revenue level of 232%, so very close to the budgeted year-end figure of 230%, and well below our limit of 290%. Just looking at the cost of funds and interest rate forecasts. So the dark blue line there shows our forecasts in the annual plan, and the purple line there shows the updated forecast as at the end of September. So you see quite an increase there, which was due to the increase in interest rates. That margin gets wider and wider, and the reason for that is we've got a lot of hedging in place in the first 2, 3, 4 years, but not so much out in the latter years. So the impact of changing interest rates has a much greater impact. Those forecasts are likely to come down slightly because since September you have seen a reasonable decrease in long-term interest rates. And just a reminder that our credit ratings have recently been reaffirmed at AA from S&P and AA2 from Moody's, and they're both on stable outlook. And I'll pass over to Nicola to take us through the parent results.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everyone. So just to start, for Auckland Council, with some projects completed in the first quarter, really pleasingly we had Te Wharekura, the Western kiosk, opened on the waterfront, repurposed into a cultural and marine education space. This was a project that's been years in the planning, and fantastic to see it completed. Also of note in the quarter, Portland Road Enhancement Project achieved practical completion in August to improve the water conveyance through the stream and wetlands. And the picture on the right is of the Waiorea Community Recycling Centre near Western Springs, which was opened and it brings the total number of recycling centres in the network to 11. Phil also noted the completion of the Myers Park upgrade and underpass, which is another significant project. In terms of our spend then on capital investment was 93 million in the quarter, which was very close to budget, as Ross mentioned. The largest project with delays is the Port of Auckland outfall upgrade, and that is all tied up with the collapse of the sewer on St George's Bay Road. And so work is ongoing to figure out how to progress that one. In terms of operating performance, Peter spoke to the November results, and these are consistent with the Q1 results. I won't labour the point around consenting revenue being higher. That's been well canvassed, and that is certainly having a favourable impact on our results. Our expenditure is very close to budget, a few overs and unders, but tracking very well. In particular, our savings progress has been very pleasing in the first quarter, and we have achieved 38.1 million of our $50 million target. So that $50 million target is made up of the 33 million, which was set during the annual budget process, and 17 million from our previous target. The progress has substantially been made by implementing the initiatives that were directed through the annual budget decision-making process. A couple of examples of this is the service centre integration, so closing service centres and integrating them into other facilities, and the changes to open space maintenance. There was a detailed report on this that went to the Revenue, Expenditure and Value Committee, if there's more detail required. And I will hand to Karuna.
Thanks, Nicola. So as you can see up there, we had 24 performance measures that were updated, and 13 we achieved, and we didn't meet 11 of them. So we did have positive results for customer satisfaction and regulatory and licensing, and our stormwater services continued to do well. However, what's not up there but is in the report is the customer satisfaction for the first 3 months did not reach higher than 51%. And a big reason for this was the large volumes of requests for information and engineer investigation, requests for service from the weather events, and length of time required for these to be resolved. And in terms of, the ones that we did not achieve, library visits and active library members, we didn't meet target, but we are seeing signs of recovery with new registrations, and there's an ongoing upward trend in members. The report also details strong numbers in terms of library items checked out. So I will leave it there and hand back to you, Mayor Brown.
Thank you, Karuna and team. Questions from Deputy Mayor Simpson first.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, team. And it's lovely to see some positive highlights in the report. You've done really well. And I also like the new reporting that you're working on. I think that's very helpful for everyone as well. Look, I've just got a question for you first, John, on the debt. Because when we sold the airport shares, that was for pay down of debt. Can you just confirm that, did you do that immediately, or did you hold that money until the debt was due and then pay it down? And if so, what were the advantages of doing, why did you do that? Just want to get that point clear.
Through you, Chair, in practical terms, we received the funds from the sale and then we paid down debt as it came due. So that occurred really over September and a little bit of October. So what we did before the sale was actually make sure we had enough short-term debt that we could repay that in a pretty short time frame.
Thank you. I just wanted to I've been asked a bit about that, so that's good to have that clarification. My second question, and look, I'm normally accentuating the positives and I love the positives, but I just think, seeing we're looking at a better review of this, looking at paragraph 32, we've pretty much got 11 that we haven't met and 13 that we have. For ease of us, could you just look at the reporting in the future, that you highlight the ones that we're not meeting and what you're doing about that, so that in the summary report, so then you don't have to keep going to both? Because whilst we all like to celebrate the positives, and I think that's really important, and highlight those, we do need to keep an eye on that which we're not achieving and making sure that we're really on top of that. So I think that would be quite helpful because it's not in the summary. All right, so that's just, could you possibly do that as a question?
Absolutely, Councillor Simpson will note that for next quarter. Thank you.
Councillor Turner, please.
Thank you. Mr Tucker, you talked about the increased patronage on public transport. So Auckland Transport told us that, we've got ourselves locked into a subsidising model, and that every time we increase that activity, we actually increase our deficit costs. You made comment about the improvement to budget because of increased patronage, but then you, if I heard you right, you also made comment about that pushing a problem out into the long-term plan. So how do we fund, what's the workings there of the fact that surely those subsidisation costs are real time, just like the fare recovery?
Yeah, so over time, if we provide more services, we run more buses, that costs more. We've got to have more drivers, more buses, more fuel costs, etc. But within the year, for a given set of bus services, if there's more people jump on them and pay fares, then that helps revenue in the short term. So short term, it's revenue positive, but as we provide more and more services over time, it's only a partial revenue recovery. So more services over time means more subsidy required. So over time, more people, us putting on more buses to cater for more people, it means increased subsidies. But in the short term, for a given set of services, more people using it helps.
Sorry, just for my clarification again, if more people use it and you're having to drive the bus further and use more petrol immediately, that increases costs. Where do we pull that money from if we're in a deficit situation before we get to the subsidisation part of it? Like how does that, you're saying that we're better off by getting more people riding today, but we're in a deficit situation where we're subsidising all that activity. How do we fund that extra money out of, because we set the subsidies kind of in a longer term?
Yeah, I guess because in this current quarter, at the moment, we've got more people on buses, so therefore less subsidies required than we thought there might be, because there's more revenue coming in, and more people on the buses paying higher fares. The subsidy is the cost after you take off that revenue. So we thought we'd have to provide a certain amount of subsidy, but because there's more revenue, the subsidy is a little bit less than we thought, and that helps the numbers in the near term. I hope that helps.
Thank you. I think.
Councillor Ferry, please.
Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge the work that you're doing on making these reports more digestible, and I found the format of this one really useful. Thank you. So I had two questions. One is, regarding the work you're doing around keeping track of the projects, I'm assuming these will be the regional projects because we already get the breakdowns for local boards on the, we get sent the information that they get every month from the community facilities. Is that correct?
That's right, those ones are covered as part of the quarterly local board performance reporting.
Yeah, and so is the intention that we're looking at potentially something similar that, they have the coloured timeframes and things like that? Because I think that would be a useful format.
Yeah, absolutely. We're working with our local board team and noting that their reports have landed really well. So we'll be looking at that as well. Yeah.
Great, cool. That was one area. The other area is in the savings. So only having 11 million to find in after just quarter one, that seems really good. How confident are we about that remaining 11 million?
Thanks for the question, Councillor. I will note that around 9 million of what we've achieved is one-off, so those are savings that we're still going to need to find on other ongoing initiatives to achieve. So we have a high level of confidence in terms of achieving the full year savings. In terms of the operating performance, we are tracking well, so we expect that there will be, some more underspending potentially in areas of the budget that can contribute to savings in the current year, as well as continuing to implement the initiatives from the annual budget and other internal initiatives that we have underway.
Thank you.
Okay, if I might, I just want to comment as well on the savings thing. Of course, yes, we've got that remaining gap to close. You'll be well aware there are savings indicated for the period beyond 1 July next year. What I can't do is wait until next year to start finding those savings as well, because every month that goes by beyond 1 July next year, it's effectively a bigger number. So we've got to do the planning and be ready for implementation of any savings that are coming out of the LTP round that we're currently in. And as you know, there is a further $20 million across the group to find in that indicative budget.
Thank you for that encouraging note there, Chief Executive. Councillor Filipaina, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a morena koutou to our staff. A supplementary on the Deputy Chair's pātai. With the airport sale and the monies to pay off debt, what was the debt prior to the monies being to pay off the debt? What was the debt prior to that? Do we know?
Through you, Chair, I can't quite remember the figures, but it would have been $830 million higher.
Okay, so what's our debt now?
Our debt now is net debt. We're talking net debt is 11.7 billion.
Okay, so the net debt before then was 833 million to the positive. That's what you're saying? What's the net debt?
Through you, Chair, yes.
So John, just to explain what I'm asking, I'm sure you know. I want to find out what the debt was. We then put in $833 million. What is the debt now after all that's been paid?
The debt now, as at end of November, from memory, is around about the same it was at end of September. But again, there's lots of other factors going on here. For example, we continue to raise debt to fund our capital expenditure program. End of November, we had obviously rates money coming in, which has a effect to reduce net debt. So there's lots of ongoing factors there. The key point about the airport share sale is that the proceeds we use to reduce net debt, and if we hadn't have done that, debt would be $830 odd million higher, plus also the costs of funding that debt, so the extra interest costs we would have incurred.
So it's about the same. Thank you. Yep. Thank you.
Councillor Williamson, please.
Just a point of information for the council stats. New Zealand have just released GDP figures and the economy's down 0.3%. That's totally against all expectations.
So that's in comparison with the information from the before that during the quarter went up 0.3%. So it's gone up 0.3.
To New Zealand just announced down 0.3.
Okay, well, that's interesting to know too. Councillor Hills has a question, then I'll have one.
Thank you, kia ora. This keeps coming up as Councillor Filipaina's question, and other people have asked it. We passed a budget, if you could answer or clarify, just so we stop it keep coming up. We passed a budget that still added significant debt because we don't fund all our capital with cash. So could we just have it explained to us? I think it's about, off my memory, 1.1 billion or something. We've funded capital through borrowing. We did reduce our debt by 830, but we still borrowed. Otherwise, we would have had to put up rates 50% to fund that capital. That's my understanding. Like, we're not suddenly cash funding all our capital.
We don't fund fully depreciation. And if you don't fund fully depreciation, you're going to have ongoing debt raising. And so we've paid back 870, but there will be a continual slope rise due to the fact that we don't fund depreciation. We're moving to fix that over the next few years, but for some years...
Yeah, I'm just asking the staff...
That's your point, and you're quite right.
Yeah. Because I think, off the top of my head, as far as I remember, cash reserves are about 1.5, 1.6 billion, and that funds part of our capital, but we still voted to approve a budget that added about $1 billion of debt because we're funding that capital through debt.
Yeah. Through you, Chair, look, that's largely correct. If you look at the report, page 5, it shows there for the quarter we had proceeds from the sale of airport shares 833, and the overall impact of underlying net debt was it went down by 639 million. So that's reflecting two things going on here. One is the 833 million used to repay debt, but acknowledging that on an ongoing basis we use debt to fund part of our capital expenditure program.
So thank you, Chair. So just checking, we would have to change our policy to suddenly cash fund all our capital if we were going to do no more borrowing, or stop $1 billion a year in capital of pipes and transport assets. Because this has come up over many years, and media do it too, that we're just magically going into debt. But as far as I know, new capital is still our policy to fund a bunch of that, at least $1 billion a year, by borrowing, because it's pipes and roads we're paying for, not with cash.
Through Chair, that's true, but what you will see in our forecasts is as we get towards and achieve fully funding depreciation, we become less reliant on debt for new assets because we generate stronger and stronger cash flows throughout the business. So while debt will probably continue to go up, it'll go up at a lower rate.
Yeah, no, I totally get that, but I think the question I asked last year's budget before the Mayor was here, when someone asked, it would cost us 50% increase in the rates to fund that sort of capital through not borrowing. So people need to know we're either cut $1 billion of capital or put up the rates 50% in any given year at the moment before we fully fund.
Yeah, through you, Chair, if we're funding $1 billion of CapEx through rates, that would be around about a one-off 50% increase.
Thanks.
Okay, I've got a small question. Karina, you in the 11 that we don't meet, you mentioned library attendance. Sometimes we cane ourselves for the public trends that are happening. I mean, basically libraries are becoming less important than they used to be. And if the public aren't using them, then we need to adjust our expectation. But it's no sense hoping. It'll be like if we had a measure of how many people use public telephone boxes, you'd find that it would be less and less because that's a thing that used to happen. So how many of our things are unrealistic because in fact the trends of the public are, and it's the public's right to have a trend. They don't use post boxes or telephone boxes as much, and they don't use libraries as much. And so whacking ourselves around the head for something or other, which is just a trend, it doesn't make any sense to me. Can you have a comment on that, please?
Yeah, thanks for that, Mayor Brown. So I will, before I pass on to Claudia, what I did want to say that as part of this LTP, when we're looking at the targets and the baselines, we're doing an analysis of actually how people are using our services and facilities and ensuring we're building in realistic targets with robust methodologies. So that's what we're doing at the moment. But Claudia, I'll hand over to you to provide more detail.
Kia ora, and thank you for the very good question. So overall, the initial LTP targets were put in mind without understanding what the upcoming lockdowns would be ahead of us. At that time, we didn't quite know the lockdowns that might be ahead because they were very difficult to predict. But in fact, what we've seen year on year is quite a pleasing amount of growth, both for our library visits as well as new registrations as well as our e-issues. So our library visits year on year have grown 17%. Our active members have grown 9%. Our new registrations have grown 19%. And e-issues have grown a whopping 37% year on year. So we are seeing some changes in customer utilisation, but we're actually seeing a stronger rebound than even we had anticipated. Some of that might be driven by the service centre integration, because what we did with our service centre integration is we merged those service centres into our libraries, which in itself also encourages customers to visit the sites that will remain open, and therefore we maximise the return on the investments that we're making in those spaces. So we're actually quite happy with the results so far. Thank you.
Oh, good answer. Thank you very much for that. Councillor Williamson.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, I've heard a number of councillors raise the issue of what our debt was, what the airport share sales brought it down to, what we then incurred by way of capital expenditure, what was funded from depreciation, what was funded from debt and so on. I think it'd be really valuable if we got in a paper, a bit of a briefing paper from officials which just outlined where we started from, what the contributing factors were to the growth in that debt, what were the mitigating things like the airport shares that brought it down, and where we ended at a particular point on the calendar. Because I think it's a very, very set of confusing numbers if we don't get that. And I've heard it asked a number of times, and I think a briefing note that had that detail in would be beneficial to all councillors.
I guess fair.
Thank you, Councillor. I think the best way of covering that is we did have a report on the governing body on the 26th of October 2023 that actually went through the funding benefit of the event, of the transaction. However, I'd like to take that note and bring it into the next comeback, and we could use the investor briefing pack, which talks about the funding sources we use and the investment and the areas in which that goes in, and that would provide a briefing on what we use the sources of funding for and what they're spent on, which I think would be a useful addendum to the airport share sale item as well.
Peter, the only concern I've got is that sometimes for those of you who are in the financial sector and working with the data, you see those reports and you can spot where the numbers are and it's visible. But a nice, simple Excel which said, here's where we started debt-wise, here's the things we accumulated over the way with capital expenditure, here's how we reduced it with airport shares, here's what was funded from depreciation, here's what was debt incurred, and then where we finished. Something that simple, I think, would help all councillors.
Thank you. We'll take that on board. I've got a waterfall diagram forming in my mind as you speak, so sounds great.
It is in the annual budget documents, but I think what Councillor Williamson is correct, that if it was just a pull out of those details.
I think that's probably helpful, because some people are saying, oh, we did that and the debt went up a little bit. I think you've got to understand that years and years of sitting around here and not funding depreciation will guarantee your debt will go up. Councillor Walker.
Yes, just following on from Councillor Williamson's request, when we do that work, can we also indicate the ongoing deficit from development contributions? For example, if we have 10,000 new homes per year and we have a current deficit of probably between 60,000 to 80,000 per home, that's between 600 and 800 million a year. If you multiply that by a decade, that's $6 to $8 billion. Now, I keep asking for this. It would be very useful to have this, because I would suggest that is the single biggest contributor to our ongoing debt problem, and we have an opportunity in this long-term plan to go some way to rectify it, because the longer we don't, particularly given the significant immigration we are facing into Auckland, the worse it becomes. And I'd suggest it's probably worse than that. So can we bolt that on to Mr. Williamson's request so we have that information, and can the public have it in what we go out with in the long-term plan, at least as a commentary? Thank you.
To ask the finance team if they understood what that was.
Yes, I think we did understand what that was. It's a good point. We talked about the fact that development contributions are currently underperforming to our current budget, and it is the part of the assumptive base that will go into the long-term plan. So it'll very much be a trajectory of what we expect to happen in that space. I'm loath to add it into the request on the simplicity of the debt movements and a waterfall around that, because I think it will complicate the issue, but we'll certainly take away and have already taken on board the DC trajectory and what that will form as part of the long-term plan. I'll ask Ross if he wants to add anything to that.
No, I think that's right. In terms of the movements over the quarter, DCs will be part of that. I think what you're talking about there is the longer-term picture, and we can provide more information on that through as part of the long-term plan. I understand some work has been commissioned on the costs and benefits of growth as well, which might be informative in that space.
So
Yeah, I might add
supplementary
that my office has commissioned some work on the actual costs of, because the immigration, we don't have any say in immigration. Suddenly the last government opened the tap and 114,000 people arrive in our city, all expecting footpaths, roads, toilets, flushing, water supply, power and everything else, and often not increasing our rate income at all. And it seems to me that we're just commissioning a report to see who gains and who doesn't. The government gains from this, but the council loses from this. And so I want that information so that we can sit down with the government and say, when you open the door, have a chat to us. We're not quite ready for all these people here. And in fact, we probably need 3 or 4 years of nobody coming so that the infrastructure can catch up to what was planned. And so we can't. And so that goes with Councillor Walker's point.
So supplementary question, it would be useful, particularly with the long-term plan coming up, that we look back the last 10 years and just do a rough order exercise of what we've missed out on. That could well be 6 billion, 8 billion. And it would be useful to forecast out over the life of the 10-year plan to indicate that we'll probably be down maybe 10 billion. It'd be nice to know that in advance, because then you've got history matched with present, matched with projection, and we'll then be aware of how big a hole we're digging. That would be great, Mr. Mayor.
I think it would help us when you say looking to the future. We don't know what the government's plans are about immigration, because the last government had no immigration for 2 years and then suddenly, without telling us, opened the door, 114,000 people, and we don't know what quality they were. We don't know if they're just Uber drivers or whether they were geniuses. It was just kind of random, but they're going to be a cost to us. And so I think we need to have some input in that because those people expect services. That's a very good point. Thank you for raising that. Councillor Watson. Councillor Dalton has a question.
Thank you. Peter.
Walker, sorry.
Your report that you're going to be producing, I think when we talk about the pre-airport shares going on the debt, I think Councillor Filipina does understand quite well, just trying to make a point that we sit with the same debt. Could there have been better wisdom in what to do with those shares? So I think as we move forward to the LTB, because there does seem to be majority support for the shares going into a future fund, it'd be good to, when we get that advice, I don't know if it forms part of the report that Councillor Williamson is asking for, but about the value of the shares going into a future fund and investments, other investments, rather than paying down debt. We understand our debt would be 800 million more if we didn't put the shares in the debt. So what we're looking for is the wisdom of what we do with the next lot of shares that are going to be proposed to be sold. If that could be, it might be incorporated in advice that's going to come back to us, perhaps not in this paper that has been requested. Is that possible? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Chair. Yes, that advice is part of what's been kicked off by the political working group on the investment space, and that is currently being worked through. John, do you want to talk about the timeline on that advice?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So that advice will come back late January, early February to inform the, I think, LTP workshop. I think it's on the 14th of February. So that'll include options on what to do with proceeds from any future airport shared sale, should that take place, and that will include the merits of either paying down debt or going into a fund.
Thank you for that. And I just a request perhaps to you, Phil, that the full governing body gets some oversight of what is happening in that committee, because I think we sort of lost our way a bit last week when we were not completely informed of what that political working party had been working on. Thank you. That's important as we go into the long-term plan discussions.
I think you're absolutely right, and I fully take that on board. Thank you very much for that question, Councillor Dalton. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you. I wanted to ask of officers, is there another way that we can perhaps start measuring the library's use? Because, you know, we all know in our communities, the libraries are well used by our communities. They are the hub of the community. And is there a way to measure that use as opposed to just internet usage, visits, active membership and items that are checked out, so that we get a full picture of how vital the libraries are in our communities, please?
Good question.
I'm happy to take that question through you, Mr. Mayor. So thank you for the question. So we do measure more accurately now our library visits. We implemented a new system in 2022. And so what that allows us to do now is measure the visits, and these are and continue to be high. So for November, 667,000 visits. We can get more sophisticated with visitation data as we go on. There are increasingly number of technology tools that we've got available, but at the moment our systems, we believe, are actually fairly strong. They are still evolving though, and as we've transitioned from the old counting system to the new counting system, there are still data areas that we're picking up some data, but they're not material in nature or size at this stage. So we actually do look at a lot more on a per library visit basis than simply the Wi-Fi tracking. We do dual counts as well and other technology tools. I hope that answers your question.
I think so, but it was more about the use rather than the visits, because so many people use the libraries, but they may not be tracked as a visit. You know, we have all those community functions there and events and everything.
So it's a very good question. So I believe we do track all of the attendances that we get at the libraries. I will need to check whether or not some of the after hours numbers are tracked, because yes, we do use our libraries not only for library visits and traditional library use such as taking out books, but also for events, for programs. We've had quite a substantial increase in our programs again over this last year, and what that's meant is that because of the number of programs that we've been able to reinstate, we return to business as usual, and as a result of those programs, our visits increased. So all of those stories are creating a really good positive picture.
If I might comment, as Karuna indicated, we've got an opportunity through the LTP to have a look at our measures and are doing so. So we'll take that comment on board, not just for libraries, but more generally. I think it is time for a refresh on some of our performance indicators, targets and measures in the LTP.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was the point. Okay. A small one from Councillor Walker.
Just a very small one for Claudia. And it just goes further to the questions that have been raised about libraries. It's based on my observation of my local libraries and the events and the things that they put on, and generally the outstanding attendance at those events, whatever they are. It would be useful to have some reporting on that, because my observation is that it's very good use of space if the library has the space. My further observation is often it doesn't necessarily involve a great deal of effort on the part of the librarians. In many instances, they are facilitating someone that's presenting and running something within the library space. So it's generating a lot of leverage and multiplication of good stuff. So if we could have some reporting on that, it may vary from library to library, I don't know, but I'm just working off my library. And Merry Christmas goes out to the librarians.
Thank you, and thank you for the feedback. So we also provide reports to each of the local boards. So the local board reports have more detailed reporting, but I can have a chat to the team afterwards to see what we might need to do in future reports for this committee as well. Thank you.
Okay, I'll move that we receive this report, and it'll be seconded by the Deputy Mayor, and you guys can retire, and I'll see if there's any debate further required on that, but there was a fair bit of debate in that lot anyhow. Has anyone got anything further to contribute? Otherwise, I'm going to move this. Thank you, Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Mayor. And it wasn't to debate your point about immigration, but I do want it on the record that I didn't agree with everything you said, and I feel like that governments and opposition parties in the last few months have been demanding more immigration, more people coming here to fill jobs, and there has been a bit of a change in that approach in the last couple of weeks. So I personally think that it's been fantastic to have all these people coming here to do amazing work for us after a long time of people wanting doctors, nurses, bus drivers, significant amount of work done for the city through immigration. So I think when we talk about it, we need to focus on the really positive things that immigration brings our city as well. That was just making sure that.
Oh, this party political broadcast, thank you, but basically I'm just asking for an independent view of the costs and where they benefit. I don't have a view on it myself. But thank you very much. Any further? Councillor Henderson, please.
Yeah, just really quickly, and thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just want to draw councillors' attention to, I think it was in the mayoral proposal documentation through Nexus, that there is a per library usage data that's been uploaded there that I've been asking for, and I just want to thank staff for collating that. It's extremely useful, valuable stuff, so I just refer councillors to that if they want to have a look at their local library or otherwise, and go from there. I think it's really important for our future policy making decisions. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Okay, all those in favour? Contrary? Carried. Thank you very much for the presentation of that report, and I do agree that the presentation method is a great leap forward and gives us a better indication of what exactly has happened in the last 3 months. Thank you, Karuna. Item 9,